What is it that you have to say that's timely and novel and unique and prescient? You have to really have a good wrap on that. And if you don't have a compelling point of view, then you better have a plan to get one quick.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Today's Agency Podcast. I'm Shawn Butler, your host, marketing professor, growth consultant, 3 times agency founder, and unvaccinated, cold going on today. This is not COVID, but I definitely am feeling something from this trip to Florida that stuck with me. But fortunately, the show goes on. Today, I'm fortunate to get to sit down with a good friend of mine for a virtual conversation with Jason Mlicki. How are you doing today, Jason?
I'm good. It's better than you, apparently, Shawn.
No, it's that seasonal, whatever it's called. I think I picked it up in the airport. Jason, we've known each other a little while. I'm excited to have you on the podcast. Jason runs Rattleback. It's an agency that provides growth-enabling marketing for professional services firms. That's his niche. And he works with firms to establish growth strategies, develop thought leadership content. I know that's huge for you, and we're going to talk about that as we get into this. But with thought leadership that enables strategies to succeed and drive lead generation programs that are required to turn strategies into realities. Jason, you've worked with strategy firms, operations consulting firms, AE firms, data analytics firms, IT services firms, think tanks. You've done it all. You've played the game for a while with top tier people, and it's great to have you on the show.
Well, it's good to be here. It's always good to talk with you. You and I have known each other for a while, and I always enjoy our conversations. I always learn a little bit and hopefully share a little bit, and everybody gets a little bit of value. So happy to be here.
Now, you've done podcasting yourself. You want to take a minute and talk about what you guys do on Rattle and Pedal?
Yeah, I can do that real fast. So it's we're on episode 150, 155, something like that. And it's a marketing podcast.
I'm very envious of your numbers.
Well, those are the numbers you should care about, right? You should care about listenership, right? But it's really intended for managing partners, marketing leaders, and professional services firms. And we just try to take a divergent thought process on growth and marketing. So get them thinking in different ways about what they're doing. Sometimes we interview, sometimes we have on, those folks to talk about what they're doing. Other times it's just us sharing our perspective. It's sort of a little bit of a mix of both. And certainly have had the hard lessons learned of running a podcast for 4 years, and happy to share those with listeners as well if they care. So
no, go over and check that one out. I've caught a few episodes, and you guys have good banter, good chemistry. You dive into a lot of topics that would be relevant to my audience. Again, on today's agency, we want to talk about what it's like to run a digital marketing, a PR, a comms, a creative, a brand agency today. And how that's changed. And I warned you, some of the stuff I want to hear is your predictions into how that's going to look in the future. But Jason, you've been doing this a couple of years.
I've been doing this for 20 plus years, 21 years I've been in the agency business. So, and I would say I've actually been in 4 different agency businesses, all in the same agency. And we can talk more about that.
Our listeners are often very interested in how people get into this crazy and sadistic industry that we call advertising.
Yes. So, how did I get into this business? So when I came out of business school, I just knew I wanted to do something different. I was coming out in 2001. I wanted to do something digital. At the time, we were kind of at the tail end of the dot-com bubble, and I was really kind of enamored with the digital consultancies. And those things, of course, all dried up when the bubble burst. In the spring of the year I was graduating, and my dad had this design firm. My dad had owned this design firm for 30 years, and he's like, "Hey, why don't you come work here?" And so I came in with tons of energy and vision on what we could be doing differently in a small creative services firm. And I've sort of morphed that agency at least 3 times in the last 20 years, either to pursue new opportunity or really just to react to the market. I mean, the market for agency services has drastically changed in the last 20 years. So the way that you serviced clients, what the value you provided, what they were buying, how they hired you circa 2001 looks nothing like it does now, right? I mean, that's 8 years before Google was a thing, right? So just a very different time.
No, I like that. That's good setup for the conversation I want to have. We'll be doing some time traveling, and I want to dive into what that means for morphing the agency. Specifically, Jason, how have you seen the marketing world, especially the agency world, change since you began in 2001?
Well, let's start with the marketing world, and I'll just kind of frame it a little bit differently. But if I think back when I first entered this business, I entered this business with a desire to be a brand consultant and build a brand consultancy. So sort
Sexy.
of more.
That was what everybody wanted.
That's what everybody wanted. You wanted to be the brand advisor. And at the time, if you think about marketing, that's what marketing was about. Marketing was mostly about big, broad brand awareness type work. Developing brand strategy, figuring out positioning, building awareness, figuring out strategy. How you're going to segment the marketplace and how you're going to build a brand that, connects with certain segments of the market, right? So that was like what marketing was completely focused on at the time. So it made a lot of sense to be focused on sort of that brand side of things. But I think marketing has totally morphed to a whole different place in the last 20 years, right? I mean, I think it morphed from that to, really being about lead generation, right? So marketing somewhere around 08, 09, maybe a little bit before that, became tasked with serving up leads, whereas it didn't really have that objective before that. I mean, it was, build big, broad brand awareness, let the sales team go in there and create sales opportunities. And all of a sudden it was like, no. There's this whole performance-based advertising thing that's flowing out of Google. And, you guys got to serve up leads. And it didn't matter whether you were a consumer business or a B2B business, that was the new mandate for marketing. And that became, really how the, agencies had to shift. And certainly you saw whole new agencies form that didn't exist. I mean, I remember 04, 05 clients talking to me about search engine optimization and having literally no answers for them because Google wasn't even really a commercial property at the time. So what are we optimizing for? Yahoo?
I remember it was about 2009 when I first heard the title CRO, that conversion rate optimization, which was again this shift in focus you're talking about to a very results, very transactional style of marketing.
Yeah, so very different. And so we didn't have those answers, right? We were looking at the world from the lens of a brand at that point in time. Like, how do you build a brand? How do you build awareness? How do you build relevance? How do you build preference? All those types of kind of classical CPG marketing concepts that we were kind of bringing to B2B companies at the time, which has always kind of been our niche. So, I guess if you go back 10 years, I think marketing morphs into lead gen, right? So all of a sudden it's like marketing's got to be a content publishing machine that serves up lead gen, has to serve up high quality leads to the sales organization. And now I think it's more about revenue, right? It's about, you've got to be chasing, revenue growth in partnership with sales, right? So it's not just about serving up the lead. It's about making sure that whatever you're doing from a marketing perspective is leading to revenue growth. And that has to be, done in extremely tight orchestration with the sales function, meaning that you just got to be more closely aligned and more in conversation with, what does a quality lead look like? What does an ideal client look like? And that's both firmographic, demographic, psychographic. It's everything, right? It's not just delivering the right people. It's delivering the right people with certain attitudes and belief systems in the right organizations and at the right time, right? So there's just a lot more pressure on marketing to really prove its worth and metal and drive revenue now more than ever. So that's the grand arc that I see when I look across the last 20 years. I don't know if you agree with that or if you've seen something different.
No, I'm especially interested in your take on that content publishing aspect that we saw surface. I know that you believe very much in establishing growth strategies for the clients you work with. How does thought leadership play into that?
Well, so if you think about it, thought leadership, at least for the firms we work with, thought leadership is the lever, right? So, it's their compelling point of view on a burning issue that a client faces. So I'll just make stuff up right now. We have one of our ops consulting firm clients, right? What are manufacturers really struggling with right now? Well, they just came out of a 24-month cycle where they've had to retrofit and reconcile supply chains and struggle through talent retention and acquisition. They don't have enough people to do the work, right? So they can't get anything out the door because they can't get the parts, they can't get the people. Now, interest rates and inflation are going through the roof. And so some of those supply chain issues are subsiding, talent issues are subsiding a little bit. And now it's like, well, how are we effective? How are we efficient in this environment? So thought leadership is really about leading the client on that journey. We were out in front of supply chain stuff with that client in early 2020. I mean, right after the pandemic starts, we are talking about supply chain right away before supply chain becomes a thing, right? To help them deal with this because it's going to be a thing. And it's going to be the same thing walking into 23, right? So helping the client really struggle through these complex issues that they've got to solve because it's hypercritical. So the thought leadership is a lever, right? It's a lever to grow the business. It's a lever to start a conversation with a prospective client. It's a lever to deepen a relationship with an existing client. It's a way to guide the client to where they're trying to get, maybe before they understand where they need to go. Especially if you do it really well. So it's a desire to be in front of the market that way. So for our clients anyway, it is the growth catalyst for everything really at the end of the day. Because it's what creates demand. It's what, catalyzes conversation. It's what kind of gets the ball rolling in any type of revenue push. And it's noisy right now. I just talked about this today. It is crazy noisy. It's been noisy for the last 12 years, but it's kind of gone from noise to deafening chaos in the last 3.
It's got noisier. Yeah. And what do you mean by noise?
There's just so much in the system right now. I was looking for the data that I pulled up this morning. I did some math and I came up with that there was 1.4 million lifetimes of content that was published in 2020. In 1 year.
1 year.
In 1 year. That's how much there is in the system right now.
Yeah, I've seen variations of that statistic that there's so much content being created right now that there's no chance of getting through it, let alone, finding the stuff that's actually worth reviewing and reading. Now, I know you're coming off of your Profiting from Thought Leadership Conference you do at the beginning of November. What kind of insights, are you guys coming up with from that event you do in SoCal?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really good conference this year. I mean, obviously, we get tier one firms to come and talk about how they're cutting through the noise. So we had IBM there, McKinsey there, Deloitte there, Accenture there. Some of the key takeaways that I had was, obviously, it starts with having a truly distinct point of view, which I think a lot of firms just don't have. So, like, what is it that you have to say that's timely and novel and unique and prescient? And you have to really have a good wrap on that. And if you don't have a compelling point of view, then you better have a plan to get one quick, right? You better say, well, okay, these are the issues that we need to own. The clients are struggling with. What's our unique take on how they should be solving those problems, right? The one thing that we heard a lot of was, I think people taking more of an outside-in approach to things, which is really good, meaning that spending more time with clients and customers to really understand not just what they're struggling with, but why they're struggling with it and how they're struggling with it, which doesn't show up in survey data or in web analytics data, right? It's contextual conversations like these where you're talking to somebody about, okay, you're telling me you're struggling with supply chain, but why, how, what do you mean? What are you really struggling with? And getting a layer underneath that you can only get in dialogue, and using that to fire up content engines so that the content is really speaking at a much more contextual level to the people you're trying to reach, in a way that they hear it or they see it or they consume it and they go, yeah, that's me. That's totally what I'm struggling with. I need to work with this firm. I need to work with this company.
Now that sounds like a conversation between the business and its clients. How would agencies get in to stir up or encourage that type of a dialogue?
That's a great question. I think the agency is the objective in between resource a lot of times, right? So if just like classic market research, right? If you wanted to do classic market research and get feedback on your brand, the customer usually doesn't want to tell you directly, right? You always have kind of an intermediary in there. So frequently having that intermediary is the same value. There's more trust in the client having that conversation if there's maybe a third party arbiter involved.
Sure.
Or quite frankly, there's also skills gaps inside of most organizations, right? They don't really have the people that know how to have that qualitative dialogue and ask the questions the right way to get the answers they need. One of our clients ran a roundtable, so an executive roundtable through all of 2020 that was super valuable. And it was run by an external third party that would moderate the discussion. So you'd get 12 or 15 COOs in a virtual room and have discussions about their most pressing issues, but it wasn't moderated by the firm. It was moderated by a professional moderator, right? Someone who does this for a living. And that became the pulse of what we were going to, what basically everything we published on over the course of 12 months. So I think sometimes just that objectivity is so critical that firms lack, really any organization lacks when they're trying to do this kind of stuff.
So thought leadership's not going away. What do you see being the future of the right way for an agency to play into, especially in the B2B space that you're so familiar with, to help their clients?
I think it's a great question. So obviously, where we're focused right now is trying to lean in on video more, lean in on audio more, lean in on helping
nobody
them.
reads anymore.
Well, so that's a bit of a misnomer, but yes, there's certainly people reading less than they used to. And I've talked about this for 4 or 5 years, this idea that, they want a lean back content experience, meaning that they don't want to work so hard for these great insights. I don't really want to read a, 35,000 word business book anymore. I'd like to get a synopsis of that much quicker, right? So I don't think that's going away, and I think that's a real thing. And I think that's where agencies can shine, right? There's been a collapse of the cost of entry into doing this type of AV work, right? I mean, it used to be you wanted to get a video done, it cost you an arm and a leg, and nowadays anybody with an iPod or a webcam can do something. But that doesn't mean that the clients have the skill sets to how to be their best on camera. I think you probably know my friend Vern Oakley. You know Vern Oakley?
I know Vern. Yeah, Vern? Pictures.
Yeah, so he wrote a book about that, how to be your best on camera, right? And I think there's so many firms that can provide that value to the client to help them understand how to not just do the technical side of multimedia content, but actually like do something great. Oh yeah, you got his book.
Leadership in Focus. Vern would be glad to see that the podcast plugged his book.
Yes, he would.
But good stuff written from the point of view of a producer when you talk about how you need key people in your organization to suddenly become content creators. And if you believe what's out there and what's coming, and what you've been talking about, Jason, we all need to become content creators, either audio or video or some other easy to consume content creation method.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the reality of modern marketing, right? Like I don't see any other way around it. there's so many things that have moved us towards this over the last 10 years. You don't have enough time in an episode to do it, but certainly it's the, collapse of the cost of publishing. It's the rise of search and its ability to, literally find a needle in the haystack. I've said that for years. Like, you can physically find the needle in the haystack now. You couldn't do that, 15 years ago. So a lot of those things kind of came together to sort of create this massive content machine that we're all living inside of, in some way, shape, or form. But
no, it's great insights. It's not necessarily encouraging, but I always say, don't hate the game, figure out the rules and play to win. So if I could ask you, this is a bit of a challenging question. I like to turn into a thought question. But if you were starting this out today, it's not 2001, it's 2023 basically, and Jason Mlicki has to build an agency. What would you build today that you think would work?
I think I would just be more purposeful, about everything. I think you have to be super purposeful about the clients you want to work with, what you offer them, what your value proposition is, how you're going to find them, how you compete, who you hire, how you're compensated. I just think you have to be super purposeful about every single one of those decisions, because they all build on the next, right? How you find clients will affect how you're compensated. Who you work with will affect what it is you provide them. What you provide them will affect who you hire and how you compensate them. So it's like, I look back and I think I was never nearly purposeful enough on all of those very specific decisions at every point of the curve. And I think if you're going to be successful these days, you have to be super purposeful about that. And maybe you have to be most purposeful about what your value proposition ultimately is, because, I think one of your prior guests you had on was talking about kind of, just access to talent, right? There's just freelancers everywhere that you can hire to do anything. And so what is the purpose of the agency? Why is the agency there? And you have to be super clear on that if you're going to create a value wedge. And that value wedge is essentially what drives, revenue and margin for your organization. And if you're not super clear on that, you don't really totally understand it. And it's just, we're some kind of vague connector of talent. That's a problem, right? You've got to have a really crystal clear wrap on that value proposition. So, and I would say I couldn't have answered any of those questions 20 years ago, right? I couldn't have answered, I used to, my running joke was in the early days of the agency, it's like someone would ask me, who do you want to work with? I was like, well, do they breathe and do they have money to buy design services?
Yes.
That was my answer. Like, I don't know.
I talk to a lot of agency owners that's still their audience is anybody with a pulse and a credit card.
Yeah. You cannot, that can't be your audience, right? You've got to segment the market in a very purposeful way. And so, that's probably my biggest advice I have, kind of to myself. It's something you have to kind of revisit all the time. I think David Baker always talks about that idea of your positioning, every 5-7 years, maybe less, you got to really kick the tires on that and say, is this still the right positioning? Is this still are we still servicing the right people on the right issues with the right solutions? And if we're not, we got to make a change. And that's a question you have to ask yourself all the time. And quite frankly, a question you didn't really have to ask yourself all years ago, right? Your competition was much more local and it was a much smaller selection of options.
Yeah. Well, I think you circled back to where you began, which was that you morphed the agency you built. Rattleback has gone through a few different, transitions over that time period. Do you think it maps to what you just said about every 5 to 7 years?
Yeah, it actually does. Actually, to your point, we morphed from being a brand agency to being almost an ad agency there for a little while. We morphed into certainly then into a content agency and now some hybrid of content and lead gen, right? So and all of that has been in a journey to try to stay ahead of the market, right, and to stay ahead of really where the client's challenges are. And then also, I think you also have to understand not only what are their challenges, but what are the things that they just can't do themselves, and they know they can't do them themselves, and they need not just an extra set of hands, they need someone who's much smarter about that topic than they are, and know where that is. And then you have to invest, quickly and deeply in building knowledge in those areas so that you can sell that value proposition.
I love that thinking. What's the best way people can keep up with what you're doing online?
Oh boy, great question. Probably the easiest thing to do is to just go to rattleback.com and subscribe to the newsletter. So if you go to the insight section of the site, that's where the subscription is. You can get our newsletter. It comes out once a week, usually every Wednesday, although I have to admit we have not been as disciplined as we should be.
I've been getting it. I'm on the list. It's good stuff. All right. Thank you, Jason, so much for coming on board, sharing what you know, what you've been through, and especially giving us this look at where the agency industry might be headed. I want to thank my audience for listening to today's agency. We try to offer you a weekly update on the evolution of advertising, marketing, digital communication businesses, what it looks like from an ownership standpoint to keep business owners working on their business instead of getting stuck in the business, so you can automatically reach your goals for growth, success, and freedom. If you'd like to connect, go to relevantforagencies.com or today'sagencypodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or over on LinkedIn. And remember, you built the business. You own that business. Don't let it be the other way around. Do great work.
That's good advice. Thanks, Shawn.